In the Mishnah, actually it's a Braisa, but it's taught as a Mishnah. In the last chapter of Pirkei Avot, which we read on Shabbat, it says that every day a bas kol goes out, a voice of heaven goes out from the mountain of Choreb, and it announces Oy lohem labriyos me'elbona shel Torah. Woe to the creatures from the embarrassment and the shame of the Torah. And the question everybody asks is, who hears this voice? And if you don't hear it, what effect does it have? And you have to also understand, why does it say from the Mount of Choreb? Why not from Har Sinai, from Mount Sinai? And even though Sinai and Choreb are together, it's well known that Sinai and Choreb are twin peaks. It's a double peak. Part of it is called Har Choreb and part of it is called Har Sinai. And what is the effect of the bas kol? And what difference does it make if we don't hear it? What is its significance? Why elbona shel Torah, the embarrassment of the Torah, and not the embarrassment of those who do not fulfill the commandments of Torah? The punishments for not keeping Shabbat and not keeping Yom Kippur, eating forbidden fats, not engaging in family purity, have far greater halachic punishments than does the person who isn't learning Torah up to the standards that he's supposed to. So perhaps we can say that the reason why it says a bas kol goes out, and it goes out from Har Choreb. What is a bas kol? A bas kol, in its actual translation, means an echo, a reflection of the sound. The sound that can also be amplified and heard far away through the echo. At the time of the giving of the Torah, which this Monday morning will be the 3,333rd time, the 3,333rd anniversary of the giving of the Torah, that's divided into three Torah Nevi'im, Ksuvim, given to a Jewish people composed of Kohanim, Levim, and Yisraelim, on the third month, which is Sivan, after Nisan and Iyar, on the third day after the preparation, Shloshes Mehagbola. So the number 3 is very significant. But at the time of the idea of the number 3 means a unity of two opposites. Two opposites come and you create a third entity which unifies them. The soul and the body are in conflict, and the Torah comes and unifies the soul and the body, etc., etc. What happened at the time of the Torah that we became unified with godliness? Our body became unified with godliness vis-a-vis the Torah. What happened? So it says that God announced the Torah, Kol Godel V'lo Yosef. It was a great voice and it did not continue. So one of the explanations it did not continue means that God didn't have to keep saying it, but the same sound lasted. God's voice didn't have to be said again and again. Or there was never another time that this happened. But one of the interpretations of it is that there was no echo. V'lo Yosef means that there was no echo that came at the time of the giving of the Torah. And the Rebbe asks, how come there was no echo? if sound, normal sound, has an echo, and this is the normal way that sound is heard, the Torah has to go through normal channels. Why would there not be an echo? The answer that the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, gives is that all sounds create an echo when they bounce off of something that doesn't absorb them. The Word of God penetrated everything. And since God's words penetrated everything, there was no echo. So now we can understand what this baskol, this echo, means. The Torah is given, and the purpose of the Torah is to create a unity of opposites, the soul and the body, and people between themselves, bosses and workers, Jews and Gentiles. There's supposed to be a unity in the world, and it's created through the Torah. But in order for that unity to take place, we have to absorb the lesson of the Torah. If we absorb the lesson of the Torah, then there is no echo, there's no bounce off, because we've absorbed the lesson, we've taken the lesson into ourselves, we've internalized it. So every day, however, the Torah is given again and again and again. But the Torah hasn't reached its purpose. It hasn't fulfilled its purpose because there's an echo. Because we who receive the Torah have not absorbed its lesson. And therefore, the echo itself, the echo of the Torah that starts off from Mount Sinai, is symbolic of echoing off of Mount Choreb, meaning that the Torah's message is not being absorbed. And therefore, to all of us who study the Torah, and if we haven't gotten the message and hasn't penetrated us, then woe to us. Oy lehem labrias me'elbono shel Torah. The shame of the Torah is it's being learned for other purposes other than the Torah itself. We're supposed to study Torah to become one with God and one with each other. If the purpose of the Torah is to become a great scholar, then that is not really learning the Torah for itself. It's selfish. So that kind of a Torah does not lead to an absorption. That kind of a Torah leads to an echo. If you learn Torah to become bigger than someone, smarter than someone, more important than someone, then the Torah gives an echo. And that's the elbona shel Torah, that's the shame of the Torah. The Torah has to bring unity. So, unfortunately, I gave a video, and it's been seen by over 1,000 people, meaning that people know about the character, and I see that a lot of the people, almost half the people, don't agree with me. I don't like to go ahead and make videos against other people. I can disagree with other people, but I don't make videos about other people. The reason I made the video is because one of my students was told by this man, Rabbi Mizrachi, that I, a Lubavitcher, am practicing a different religion. And he is well versed in Talmud and Halacha and Musar, and he quotes Zohar and Rambam. And so my response on the video was, he doesn't know Rambam and he does not know the Zohar. And if he learned the Zohar, then he is violating the Zohar by not having a full beard. When I say he doesn't know the Rambam, because most yeshiva boys don't know what the Rambam really was like. That's why I gave the video about the Rambam and his student Rabbi Yosef ibn Shimon, who wanted to become a Rosh Yeshiva to fight against the opponents of Rambam. And Rambam says, you have a parnasa, you're a doctor. Don't change parnasas. Today's day and age, anybody gives that kind of a verdict to a student would be mechutz lamachne, outside the camp. Rambam had a different perspective on how to perform the mitzvahs and how to learn Torah. The Rambam did not support the idea that you should learn Talmud unless you were a scholar and had a lot of time. But if you didn't have the time to study, then it's best that you should study the halacha, as the Rambam has it in his Sefer. That's what the Rambam believed. Of course, nowadays, the Rambam is the most popular Sefer because in the process of studying the Talmud, we study the Rambam and his opponents, what their opinions were, which is the opposite of why Rambam wrote the book. The reason why Rambam wrote a Sefer was so that we should have a clear way of how to perform the mitzvahs, not confusing, not arguing back and forth, which was not his purpose. But the Rambam's methods and the Rambam's purpose and the way the Rambam wanted people to study and how he wanted them to live their lives is different from the way the people in Bnei Brak live, or even in Yerushalayim live. Was the Rambam practicing a different religion? And then you go to the Zohar of the Kabbalists. The Kabbalists lived a certain kind of life, not necessarily an austere life, but they did fast a lot for sins that they had. But mostly the Kabbalists engaged in Kabbalistic meditation, even before the age of 40. And they felt that this was the most, and it's true, this is the most important part of the study of the Torah, the secrets of the Torah. They did not practice their ways like the people in Bnei Brak do. They lived in a certain type of bubble, and they followed the mitzvahs according to their understanding based upon Kabbalistic teachings. Most notably, they never shaved. Most Litvish yeshivas do permit shaving not with a razor. So I ask you, Rabbi Mizrachi, were the people of the Zohar practicing a different religion because they don't accept or acknowledge your way of doing things? Just because people have a different perspective does not make it a different religion. The reason why you say something like that is because you parrot somebody else. The person who says that initially was a person who one would examine his writings, would see there's a lot of questions on his knowledge and on his faith. I don't want to mention his name. I'd be stoned to death by some people out there. But I read his book, I read his Sefer, at least one of his Sfarim, and I found him to be very, very unclear, opinionated, and certainly not someone who could pass judgment on somebody else's faith. I'm not passing judgment on Rabbi Mizrachi's faith. I am saying that Rabbi Mizrachi is very wrong to say that I have a different religion because I have a different perspective as to how Torah should be studied and how the mitzvah should be done. I don't have a separate way. I was taught this by the Rebbe, who was taught this by his Rebbe, and so on, till the Baal HaTanya. The Baal HaTanya was taught by the Mizrachi Maggid and by the Baal Shem Tov. They had a different perspective as to how Torah mitzvah should be practiced. And you want to know something? Their positions have been absorbed in the greater yeshiva community. For example, the idea of simcha, the idea of joy, the idea of nigun, to have music, the idea of ahavas Yisrael, to go and to reach out to other people who have as yet to embrace the Torah mitzvahs. That was the place of the Hasidim. We were castigated for that. We were told this was crazy to go ahead and spend your time talking to people who weren't religious. You're not even allowed to look at somebody's face of a Russian, etc., etc. But now everybody claims that they are the champions of talking to people who are not yet religious and trying to bring them back. Joy, Negina, Avos Yisrael, and the awareness of God, the unity of God and love of God. Not just fear of God, but the love of God, the love of Israel, the love of the Torah. These kinds of words did not exist when I went to yeshiva, in a Litvish yeshiva. So, Rabbi Mizrachi, I don't dislike you, I don't hate you, but you're very wrong for saying what you're saying, because anyone who examines the great personalities of the past will see that they didn't practice the way people do today. It's not true. They didn't practice that way. The Rambam did not practice like the people in Bnei Brak. He was a totally different kind of Jew, as were the Baalei HaZohar, as were the Kabbalists, as were the Chassidim. But they followed the same Torah, the same mitzvahs. It's the stress that was different. How it was done was different, not what was done. And I want to wish everyone, including Rabbi Mizrachi, we should all stand at the mountain of Matan Torah this Monday morning. And instead of dividing Klal Yisrael, embrace all of Klal Yisrael. As it says, Vayichan Sham Yisrael neged Ahar, Israel as one stood by the mountain. Good job.